The afternoon sun pressed down on the wooden platform like a branding iron, turning the dusty square into a furnace. Cattle lowed in the distance. A few townspeople lingered near the general store, pretending not to watch what was happening in the center of town. 3 children stood on the auction block. Their feet were bare, their clothes hung in threadbare rags, stitched together from flour sacks and old blankets. The oldest, a girl no more than 12, held the hands of 2 younger boys, twins by the look of them, maybe 6 years old. Her face was streaked with dust and dried tears, but her jaw was set hard, like she'd decided long ago that crying wouldn't change anything. The auctioneer, a wiry man with tobacco-stained teeth, gestured lazily toward them. "Last lot of the day, folks. 3 orphans, healthy enough. Girl can cook and sew. Boys are young, but they'll grow into work soon enough. No papers, no kin, clean slate." A few men stepped closer, hands in their pockets, eyes calculating. One spat into the dirt. Another laughed quietly to himself. The girl's eyes swept across the crowd, not pleading, not desperate, just searching, looking for something human in the faces staring back at her. Then her gaze landed on a man standing at the edge of the platform, tall, broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low against the sun. He wasn't moving, wasn't bidding, just standing there, watching. She swallowed hard. Her voice cracked when she spoke, barely louder than a whisper. "Please don't leave us." The words hung in the air like smoke. The auctioneer chuckled. "Girl's got spirit, that's worth something, ain't it?" The man under the hat didn't move. His hands were still at his sides, fingers curled loosely. His jaw worked beneath the shadow of his brim, but his face stayed unreadable. The girl's grip tightened on the boy's hands. The twins looked up at her, confused, scared. One of them started to cry, soft, hiccuping sobs that he tried to muffle against her arm. "Please," she said again, louder this time. Her voice cracked on the word. "Please don't leave us here." The man shifted his weight. Slowly, he lifted his head. His name was Caleb Ryan. He was 43 years old, though the lines around his eyes made him look older. He'd worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana, fought in the war on the Union side, buried 2 brothers and a wife before he turned 30. He'd spent the last 15 years drifting, town to town, ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to be remembered. He'd come into town that morning for supplies, nothing more. He'd planned to be gone by sundown. But now he stood frozen, staring at 3 children on a platform, and something deep in his chest, something he'd thought long dead, twisted like a knife. The girl's eyes locked onto his. She didn't beg, didn't cry. She just held his gaze like she was daring him to look away. Caleb's throat tightened. He knew what this was. He'd seen it before. After the war, when the country tore itself apart and stitched itself back together with cruelty and greed, orphans became commodities. No parents, no land, no name, just bodies to be bought and worked until they broke. The law didn't stop it. Most lawmen didn't even try. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "All right, folks. Starting bid, $20 for the lot. They eat little, work hard, and won't give you trouble. Who's first?" A man near the front raised his hand. 15. The auctioneer nodded. 15 from Mr. Polk. Do I hear 20? Silence. The girl's shoulders sagged. The twins pressed closer to her, their small faces pale and hollow. Caleb's hand moved to his coat pocket. His fingers brushed the folded bills there, money he'd saved from 3 months of hard work on a ranch north of town. Enough to buy a horse, maybe a saddle, enough to keep moving. He pulled the bills out slowly. The auctioneer's eyes flicked to him. "You bidding, mister?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked at the girl again. She was staring at him now, her breath shallow, her lips parted like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. 30, Caleb said quietly. The auctioneer grinned. 30 from the man in the back. Do I hear 35? Mr. Polk turned, squinting at Caleb. He was a short man with a thick belly and a mean mouth. You even got a place to keep him. Caleb didn't look at him. 40. The auctioneer's grin widened. 40, going once. 50, Polk snapped. Caleb's jaw tightened. He glanced down at the bills in his hand. $50 was everything he had, every penny. If he gave it up, he'd have nothing, no horse, no supplies, no way out of town except on foot. He looked at the girl again. She wasn't crying, wasn't begging. She just stood there, holding her brother's hands, watching him like she already knew what he was going to do. Like she'd seen men walk away before. Caleb exhaled slowly. Then he stepped forward, pushing through the small crowd until he stood directly in front of the platform. 60, he said. The auctioneer's eyes lit up. 60, now we're talking, do I hear? That's all I got, Caleb said flatly. He held up the bills. $60, take it or don't. Polk snorted, you're a fool. Caleb didn't respond. The auctioneer hesitated, glancing between Caleb and Polk. Then he shrugged. Sold, $60 to the man in the hat. Caleb climbed onto the platform. He handed the money to the auctioneer, who counted it quickly and stuffed it into his coat. Then Caleb turned to the children. The girl was staring at him, her expression unreadable. The twins clung to her dress, their eyes wide. Caleb crouched down until he was at their level. He didn't smile, didn't try to soften what had just happened. You got names? He asked quietly. The girl hesitated, then she nodded. Emma, these are my brothers, Daniel and Samuel. Caleb nodded. All right, Emma, you three come with me. Emma's eyes searched his face. Where are we going? Caleb stood slowly, brushing the dust from his knees. Away from here. They walked in silence. Caleb led them through the narrow streets of the town, past the saloon and the livery, past the half-empty storefronts and the church with its cracked bell tower. The children followed close behind, their bare feet padding softly in the dirt. Emma held the twins' hands tightly, her eyes darting to every shadow, every stranger. Caleb stopped at the edge of town, near a cluster of cottonwood trees. He gestured to the shade. Sit. The children obeyed. Emma sat first, pulling the twins down beside her. She watched Caleb carefully, her expression guarded. Caleb crouched in front of them again. He pulled a canteen from his belt and handed it to Emma. Drink, slow. Emma took the canteen and drank, then passed it to the twins. They drank greedily, water spilling down their chins. Caleb waited until they'd finished. Then he looked at Emma. How long you been on that platform? Emma wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. 3 days. Caleb's jaw tightened. Where's your folks? Emma's eyes dropped to the ground. Dead. How? Fire 6 weeks ago, burned the whole house down. We got out, but, she trailed off, her voice flat. Nobody wanted us after that. Town said we were bad luck. Caleb's hands curled into fists. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said quietly, What town? Emma hesitated. Cresswell, about 40 miles north. Caleb froze. Cresswell. The name hit him like a fist to the chest. He stared at Emma, his mind racing, pieces falling into place. What was your father's name? He asked slowly. Emma looked up at him, confused. Thomas Brennan. Caleb's breath caught. Thomas Brennan. He closed his eyes, his hands trembling. He saw it again, the flames, the screams, the smell of burning wood and flesh. He'd been there 8 years ago, not as a neighbor, not as a friend. As a coward. He opened his eyes and looked at Emma. She was staring at him now, her brow furrowed. You knew him. Caleb's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. I was there, the night your house burned. Emma's face went pale. What? I was passing through Cresswell, stopped at the saloon for a drink. I heard them talking, 3 men, drunk, angry. They were talking about your father. Said he'd testified against them in court, got one of them sent to prison. They said they were gonna make him pay. Emma's hands clenched into fists. You heard them, and you didn't stop them. Caleb shook his head slowly. I told myself it wasn't my fight. I walked out of that saloon, got on my horse, and rode away. Told myself they were just drunk, just talking, but I knew what they were gonna do. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. You left us. I did. You could have warned him. I could have. You could have stopped them. Maybe. Emma's voice cracked. Then why didn't you? Caleb's throat tightened. He looked down at his hands, at the calluses and scars, at the dirt under his nails. Because I was afraid of getting involved, afraid of what it had cost me. He looked up at her, his eyes raw. I've been afraid for 15 years, Emma, and your father died because of it. Emma stared at him, her chest rising and falling. The twins looked between them, confused, sensing the weight of something they didn't understand. You think buying us makes it better, Emma said quietly. No. You think it makes you a good man. No. Then why'd you do it? Caleb's voice was barely a whisper, because I couldn't walk away again. Emma's expression wavered. Her anger flickered, but it didn't go out. She looked down at the twins, then back at Caleb. So what now? You keep us, feed us, pretend you're our father. I don't know, Caleb said honestly. I don't have a place, don't have a plan. All I know is I wasn't gonna let you stand on that platform and watch another man walk away. Emma's jaw tightened. She looked away, her hands TR. Embling, everybody says that after. Caleb didn't respond. He stood slowly and looked out at the horizon. The sun was sinking, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. The wind picked up, rustling the cottonwood leaves. Behind him, Emma whispered, "What do we do now?" Caleb turned back to her. "We get out of town, tonight, before anyone asks questions." Emma frowned. "Where do we go?" "There's a ranch about 20 miles south. Belongs to a man named Miller. I worked for him last year. He's a hard man, but he's fair. Might give me work. Might let you three stay." Emma's eyes narrowed. Might. She looked at the twins, then back at Caleb. "And if he doesn't?" Caleb's voice was steady. "Then we keep moving." Emma studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "All right." Caleb crouched down again and looked at the twins. "You boys got anything to say?" Daniel, the bolder of the two, wiped his nose and said quietly, "Are you gonna leave us?" Caleb's chest tightened. He shook his head. "No." "Promise." Caleb hesitated. Then he said, "I promise." Samuel, the quieter twin, stepped forward and wrapped his small arms around Caleb's neck. Caleb froze, his hands hovering in the air. Then slowly, he put one hand on the boy's back. Emma watched, her expression unreadable. She didn't trust him, not yet, maybe not ever. But she didn't walk away. And neither did Caleb. They walked through the night. Caleb led them down back roads and cattle trails, avoiding the main routes. The moon hung low and full, casting long shadows across the prairie. The children walked in silence, their feet blistered and aching, but none of them complained. By dawn, they reached the edge of Miller's ranch. It was a sprawling piece of land, bordered by wooden fences and dotted with cattle. The main house sat at the center, smoke curling from its chimney. Caleb stopped at the gate. "Wait here." Emma frowned. "Why?" "Because if Miller says no, I don't want you standing there when he does it." Emma's jaw tightened, but she nodded. She pulled the twins down to sit in the tall grass, out of sight. Caleb walked up to the house and knocked. A moment later, the door swung open. A man in his 50s stood there, tall and weathered, his gray hair slicked back. He looked Caleb up and down, then grunted. "Ryan thought you were dead." "Not yet, Miller." Miller's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" "Work." "Don't need hands right now." "I'll work for half pay, just need a place to stay." Miller crossed his arms. "You in trouble?" "Not the kind you're thinking." Miller studied him for a long moment. Then he glanced past Caleb toward the gate. "Who's with you?" Caleb hesitated. "3 kids." Miller's expression darkened. "Kids?" "Orphans, bought them off an auction block yesterday." Miller stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You bought orphans?" "Didn't seem right to leave them there." "Didn't seem right," Miller repeated slowly. "So now you're dragging them around with no plan, no money, asking me to take you in. That's about it. Miller shook his head. You're a damn fool, Ryan. I know. Miller sighed and rubbed his face. Then he looked past Caleb again toward the gate. They sick. No. Dangerous. They're kids, Miller. Miller grunted. All right, you can stay, but you work every hour I give you and those kids pull their weight. No free rides. Caleb nodded. Fair enough. Miller stepped aside. Bring 'em in. Caleb turned and waved to Emma. She stood slowly, pulling the twins to their feet, and they walked toward the house. Miller watched them approach, his expression unreadable. When they reached the porch, Miller crouched down and looked at the twins. You boys know how to feed chickens. Daniel nodded hesitantly. Good, you're on chicken duty. Girl, what's your name? Emma. You cook? Yes, sir. Then you help my wife in the kitchen. He stood and looked at Caleb. You're on fence repair, start now. Caleb nodded, yes, sir. Miller turned and walked back into the house. Caleb looked at Emma. She met his gaze, her expression still wary, but something in her eyes had softened. We're staying, she asked quietly. For now. Emma nodded, then she took the twins inside. Caleb stood on the porch for a moment, watching them go. Then he turned and walked toward the barn. He'd been working for 3 days when the riders came. Caleb was repairing a fence post near the south pasture when he heard the hoofbeats. He straightened, shading his eyes against the sun. 3 men on horseback crested the hill, riding hard toward the ranch. Caleb's stomach tightened. He recognized the man in front. Narrow face, cold eyes, a badge pinned to his vest. Sheriff Dalton. Caleb dropped his hammer and walked toward the house. Miller was already on the porch, arms crossed, watching the riders approach. Dalton reined his horse to a stop in front of the house. He tipped his hat. Miller. Dalton. Dalton's eyes flicked to Caleb. Heard yo. You got some new folks here. Miller's jaw tightened. What's it to you? Got a report. 3 orphans went missing from town 4 days ago. Someone said they saw a man matching Caleb Ryan's description leaving with them. Caleb stepped forward. I didn't steal them, I bought them. Dalton's smile was thin. From an unlicensed auction, that makes it illegal. Illegal, Caleb repeated, like selling children in the first place. Dalton's smile didn't waver. Law's the law, Ryan. Those kids are property of the county until proper guardianship is established. I'm here to take them back. Caleb's hands curled into fists. The hell you are. Dalton's expression hardened. You want to make this difficult. Miller stepped forward. Dalton, those kids are working here. They're fed, clothed, safe. What do you care where they are? I care about the law, Miller, and the law says those kids belong in county custody. County custody, Miller said flatly. You mean back on that platform? Dalton shrugged. Not my concern. Emma appeared in the doorway, the twins behind her. She looked at Caleb, her eyes wide with fear. Caleb stepped in front of them. They're not going anywhere. Dalton's hand moved to his gun. You threatening a lawman, Ryan? I'm telling you how it is. Dalton's smile turned cold. Then I guess we got a problem. The 2 men behind Dalton dismounted. One of them was a deputy. The other was Mr. Polk, the man from the auction. Polk grinned. Told you he'd make trouble, Sheriff. Caleb's blood ran cold. This is about the money. Polk shrugged. You outbid me fair and square, but then you took off with county property. That's theft. I paid for them. You paid an unlicensed auctioneer. That don't mean nothing. Caleb looked at Miller. Miller's expression was grim, but he didn't back down. He looked at Dalton. You ain't talking those kids. Dalton's hand stayed on his gun. You want to fight the law, Miller? Miller's voice was steady. I'll fight cruelty. Dalton's eyes narrowed. Last chance. The air grew thick. Dust swirled between the men. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest. Then a voice called out from behind them. Sheriff. Everyone turned. An old man on horseback rode up from the east pasture. Behind him were 4 more riders, ranch hands, men Caleb had worked beside over the years. The old man's name was Roy. He'd been working ranches for 40 years. He looked at Dalton, then at Caleb. "We got a problem here." Dalton's jaw tightened. "This doesn't concern you, Roy." Roy spat into the dirt. "Caleb's a good man, worked with him in Texas, Colorado, Montana, never known him to do a dishonest thing." He looked at Miller. "If Miller's talking him in, that's good enough for me." The other ranch hands nodded. Dalton looked around, his hand still on his gun, but the odds had shifted. 5 armed men against 3. He smiled thinly. "This ain't over." Then he turned his horse and rode away. Polk and the deputy followed. Caleb stood frozen, his heart still pounding. Miller clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Get back to work, Ryan." Caleb nodded slowly, then he turned to Roy. "Why'd you do that?" Roy shrugged. "Don't make me shoot a man I once called friend." Caleb swallowed hard, then he nodded. "Thank you." Roy tipped his hat and rode away. Emma stepped off the porch. She looked at Caleb, her expression unreadable. "He'll come back." Caleb nodded. "I know." "So let me ask you, if you were Caleb, what would you do now? Would you run, take the kids and disappear into the night? Or would you stand and fight, knowing the law itself might crush you? Take a moment, think about that. If you're still with me, tell me, what time is it where you are right now? Pour yourself something warm, settle in, and let's see where this goes. Because what happened next changed everything. The weeks passed slowly. Caleb worked the ranch from sunup to sundown, mending fences, herding cattle, breaking horses. His hands blistered and bled, but he didn't complain. Miller worked him harder than anyone else, but Caleb took it without a word. Emma worked in the kitchen with Miller's wife, a quiet woman named Clara who taught her how to bake bread and mend clothes. The twins fed chickens, gathered eggs, and learned how to milk cows. At night, they slept in the barn loft, on blankets Miller had given them. They didn't talk much. Emma still watched Caleb with guarded eyes, and the twins stayed close to her, like they were afraid he'd disappear. One evening, after the work was done, Caleb sat outside the barn, carving a piece of wood. Daniel approached him cautiously. "What are you making?" Daniel asked. Caleb looked up. "Horse." Daniel sat down beside him. "Can I try?" Caleb handed him the knife, handle first. "Careful." Daniel took the knife and started carving. He cut too deep, and a chunk of wood broke off. He frowned. "I messed it up." Caleb shook his head. "Just means it'll look different than you thought. That's all right." "Daniel." Eel looked up at him. "You're not mad." "Why would I be mad?" Daniel shrugged. "Most grown-ups get mad when you mess things up." Caleb's chest tightened. He looked at the boy, at his small hands and dirt-streaked face. "I'm not mad, Daniel." Daniel smiled, small, hesitant, but real. Samuel came over a moment later and sat on Caleb's other side. He didn't say anything, just leaned against Caleb's arm and watched the stars. Caleb sat very still. He wasn't used to this, being close to someone, being needed. It terrified him. Emma watched from the barn door. She didn't come closer, but she didn't walk away either. Later that night, Caleb lay awake in the barn, staring at the ceiling. The twins were asleep on either side of him, their small bodies curled against his. Emma slept a few feet away, her back to him. Caleb closed his eyes and saw Thomas Brennan's face, saw the flames, heard the screams. He'd carried that guilt for 8 years. It had followed him from town to town, a ghost he couldn't outrun. But now, lying here with these children who should hate him, who had every right to hate him, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The next morning, Emma found Caleb in the south pasture. He was repairing a gate, his shirt soaked with sweat. "Caleb," she said quietly. He turned. "Emma." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why'd you really buy us?" Caleb set down his hammer. He looked at her, at the way she held herself, arms crossed, shoulders tense, like she was bracing for a blow. Because I owed your father, Caleb said quietly. Emma frowned. You didn't even know him. I knew him enough to know he deserved better, and so do you. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them away angrily. I don't want your guilt, Caleb. I don't want you keeping us because you feel bad. I don't. Then why, her voice cracked, why are you still here? Caleb swallowed hard, because you asked me not to leave. Emma stared at him, her breath hitching, then she looked away, wiping her eyes. I'm still angry at you. I know. I might always be angry. That's all right. Emma looked at him again, her expression raw. The twins like you. I like them too. They think you're staying. Caleb's voice was steady. I am. Emma's lips trembled. Promise. Caleb stepped closer. He crouched down until he was at her level. I promise, Emma, I'm not going anywhere. Emma's face crumpled. Then, suddenly, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. She sobbed into his shoulder, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Caleb held her. He didn't say anything, just held her while she cried. When she finally pulled back, her face was red and blotchy. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I miss them. I know. It's not fair. No, it's not. Emma looked up at him. Do you think they'd be mad that I'm letting you take care of us? Caleb shook his head slowly. I think they'd be grateful. Emma nodded, her throat working. Then she stepped back and wiped her face again. I should get back to Clara. All right. She turned to leave, then stopped. Caleb. Yes. Thank you. Caleb's voice was rough. You're welcome, Emma. She walked away, back toward the house. Caleb stood there for a long time, watching her go. Then he picked up his hammer and went back to work. Sheriff Dalton didn't come back for 3 weeks. When he did, he brought 10 men. They rode up to the ranch at noon, kicking up dust. Miller stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. Caleb was in the barn with the children. He heard the horses and stepped outside. Dalton sat tall in his saddle, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. Last chance, Ryan, hand over the kids. Miller raised his rifle. Get off my land, Dalton. Dalton's men spread out, hands on their guns. The air grew thick with tension. Then a voice called out from behind the barn, hold on. Everyone turned. Roy was there, along with a dozen other ranch hands. They were armed, their faces grim. But they weren't alone. Behind them came more men from town, men Caleb had never met. Shopkeepers, farmers, a blacksmith. They carried rifles, shotguns, even pitchforks. An old woman stepped forward. Sheriff, my husband worked with Thomas Brennan. Good man, didn't deserve what happened to him. She looked at Caleb. If this man's looking after Brennan's kids, then I say let him. Another man nodded. We heard what you're trying to do, Dalton. Selling kids like cattle ain't right. Dalton's face darkened. This is lawful business. Lawful don't mean right, Roy said quietly. Not anymore. The crowd murmured in agreement. Dalton looked around, his hand hovering over his gun, but he was surrounded, outnumbered 20-1. He smiled thinly. Fine, keep 'em. He looked at Caleb. But you better watch your back, Ryan. Somebody's gonna come collecting one day. Caleb's voice was steady. Let 'em try. Dalton turned his horse and rode away. His men followed. The crowd dispersed slowly, nodding to Caleb as they passed. The old woman stopped in front of him. You take care of those kids, you hear? Caleb nodded. Yes, ma'am. She patted his arm and walked away. Miller lowered his rifle. He looked at Caleb and grunted. You just cost me a day's work. Caleb smiled faintly. Sorry. Miller shook his head. Get back to it. The seasons turned. Winter came, then spring. Caleb stayed on at Miller's ranch, working harder than he ever had. Emma and the twins grew stronger, healthier. Emma learned to ride horses. The twins learned to rope calves. One evening, Caleb took them to the edge of the property, where a small grove of trees overlooked the valley. He knelt down and carved 3 names into a flat stone: Thomas Brennan, Mary Brennan, and below that, remembered. Emma stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. The twins stood on either side of her. "Is this for them?" Emma asked quietly. Caleb nodded. "Yeah." Emma's voice was soft. "Thank you." Caleb stood slowly. He looked out at the valley, at the sun setting over the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Emma looked up at him. "Are you staying, for real?" Caleb looked down at her. Then he looked at the twins, at their small, hopeful faces. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I'm staying." Emma smiled, small at first, then wider. She reached out and took his hand. The twins did the same. And for the first time in 15 years, Caleb didn't feel like he was running anymore. Years later, folks in that county would still talk about the day the town stood up to a crooked sheriff. They'd talk about Miller's ranch, about the man who bought 3 orphans and became their father. They'd talk about Emma, who grew into a fierce, kind woman, about Daniel and Samuel, who learned to work the land with their own hands. And they'd talk about Caleb Rhine, the man who'd spent his whole life running from his past, until 3 children asked him not to leave. He kept his promise. He stayed. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The sun dipped low over the valley. Dust rose around their feet. Caleb stood with the children beside him, watching the light fade. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if Dalton would come back or if someone else would try to take them. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going anywhere. Not ever again.